Let's speak now to the biblical scholar and historian Wesley Huff. Wesley, good to have you back on Uncensored. A lot of people theorizing that there is a religious component to everything that is going on currently in the Middle East. Do you think that?
Yeah, well, let me right off the bat say that my area is not geopolitics, and so I can't speak to whether any one particular nation or group right now has fulfilled some sort of criteria for just war in the very recent past. That's, I think, for others to say. But what I can speak to, Pierce, are the ways that the Bible and Christian heritage that I share in have considered this very complicated topic over the centuries, because it would be somewhat foolhardy to forget that the heavy reality of war that I don't think we should ever speak lightly of. You know, as Jesus himself said, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So we see throughout Christian scripture in places like Ephesians chapter 6 and 2 Corinthians 10, the topic of waging war with preaching and words and persuasion rather than weapons. And so I think we should aim to persuade people if we can. But the reality of broken humanity, that even, you know, the conversations that we've all been having, you personally have been having even just now, is that not all people can be persuaded. And so theory and philosophizing about what should happen in an ideal world often get muddy when the rubber hits the road of this beautiful yet broken world that we live in.
I
So,
know that
you know,
I know that you don't. You're not a pacifist, but
mm,
it's interesting where the moral line is for people in terms of when war is justified. You know, sometimes you could look at a conflict like World War II, and you can say, well, clearly the Nazis represented an existential threat to the world and had to
mm.
be defeated. So therefore, you know, waging war against them was a necessity and morally justified. But a lot of other conflicts, including what is happening in the Middle East, many would argue, are much more complicated, much more nuanced, much more historical in terms of their complexity. You know, how do we work out what is moral in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, it's a very important question. Just war theory is a theory that portrayed, uh, well, let me say right off the bat, actually, just war is not holy war.
Mm.
And I think that's important right off the bat, Pierce, because jihad and just war are concepts that are completely in different universes. The idea of just war that we kind of tease out, especially when we're talking about very complicated geopolitical issues like we're discussing this morning, come from these ideas in the late third and early fourth centuries, where soldiers would come to Christian clergy and intellectuals seeking advice regarding their careers. So we have records of Roman tribunes writing to people like St. Augustine, asking whether it's possible to provide state security in a vaguely Christian way. And so we had these records of individuals like Augustine writing, you know, a seminal work, City of God, right after the sacking of Rome by the Visigoths in August 24th of 410 AD. And he doesn't write to make sense of the violence viewed, but to point out that no earthly realm, not even a Christian empire, could be an eternal city, which was what Rome was thought of. You know, for a long time, it was referred to it as the eternal city. And Augustine points out that the only city that will ever be eternal is in the hereafter, and when things are made new. And so until then, in this fallen in between time, there is some necessity for state to enforce and restrain evil for the sake of good. You know, you threaten my neighbor, I have to intervene, Augustine says. You're not being moved by persuasion, and so I must force you to stop. But Augustine is clear when he talks about just war that it's never holy and certainly not happy, even in victory. So war should only ever be done in kind of the Christian tradition that large portion of the West stands in defense of innocent people, and for the idea of trying to, not for the idea of trying to wipe out people off the face of the earth or some sort of private interest that's evil.
Mm.
And that victories, celebration should even come with tears and remorse.
Really interesting. You know, I had a debate the other day with a pro-Palestinian guest who was arguing that Hamas had not targeted people based on their religion, i.e., being Jewish, or their ethnicity, but on the fact that they objected to what they saw as an illegal occupation of Gaza and so on. And that was what inspired it. It wasn't a religious war in the sense that you just explained. I mean, do you think there's validity to that, or is that nonsense?
I mean, it's complicated when you factor in Islam and the fact that it is far more of a politico-religious movement. It's very different in the inception of Islam in the 7th century than the inception of Christianity. And even when we look at certain instances of, atrocities done in the name of Christianity throughout history, something, maybe the Crusades are coming to mind for certain peoples. The Christian worldview makes the atrocities within the Crusades problematic. So what do you call the Crusades conducted under the banner of Muhammad? Well, you call it business as usual. He was a warlord, and so to fight in his legacy is expected, but to do so under the banner of the cross should seem ironic because Christ died for his enemies. And Christianity makes sense of our justifiably cringe, mentality when we see some of these problematic situations throughout history where people are trying to invoke Christianity or religion in those ways. But it is complicated. These are multivalent issues that encompass, all sorts of factors.
Fascinating. Wesley Huff, great to have you back. Thank you very much.
Very good to be here. Thank you.
Piers Morgan Uncensored is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we ask for only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate and entertain. And we'll do it all for free. Independent, uncensored media has never been more critical, and we couldn't do it without you.